I want to do a short video on the use of the phrase sons of God in Job chapter 1 verse 6 and Job chapter 2 verse 1. And I want to first start by reading something that George Rapkin wrote in his book Genesis in Harmony with Itself and Science. And I thought it summarized what's going on in Job chapter 1 into Job chapter 2 very well. He writes, the story of Job opens by telling of a devout father who, when he knew his children were feasting, offered sacrifice for them, lest they should have blasphemed God. Then came the day of appearing before God, and of Satan being granted the permission to harass the father. The sons of God were the godly men of the time who came for worship in the presence of the Lord. They came before the Lord just as David later urged the congregation to do, when urging thanksgiving. Coming before the Lord and entering into his presence is not so striking when we find the Bible speaking of men and congregations doing this. Nimrod is said to have been a mighty hunter before the Lord, but we do not stretch our fanciful imagination to the extent of saying he must have been an angel. Now Job and his sons with other righteous men were the sons of God who presented themselves before the Lord for the act of worship and sacrifice, the father then acting as the head or priest of the family worship and sacrifice. So I thought that was a very thorough and to the point overview of what Job chapter 1 is referring to. So in this video, I want to just go into more depth from what that overview was saying and compare it with Genesis chapter 6 and what we've already learned about the sons of God referring to the godly lineage of Seth, and the daughters of men referring to those outside of that lineage, those of other lands, those that weren't following God, and how the godly lineage, those men took wives from outside, and that's where wickedness and all kinds of idolatry and serving other gods came into existence, and violence filled the land, and so God destroyed man whom he had made except for Noah. So that's the context of Genesis 6, and I think it's the same understanding with regards to separating the difference between the men of the East and the sons of God that's written about in Job chapter 1. So I'll start by reading the first 7 verses. It says, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. And there were born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters. His substance also was 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 she-asses, and a very great household, so that this man was the greatest of all the men of the East. So Job was the greatest of all the men of the East. Now, it's important that we understand men here is the same Hebrew word bain that's translated as sons when referring to sons of God in verse 6. So Job was the greatest of all the sons of the East. Now this is where we're going to see a differentiation between the sons of the East, or the men of the East, and the sons of God, or the men of God in verse 6. Just like in Genesis 6, the difference between the sons of God and the daughters of men. And his sons went and feasted in their houses, every one his day, and sent and called for their 3 sisters to eat and to drink with them. And it was so, when the days of their feasting were gone about, that Job sent and sanctified them, and rose up early in the morning, and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus did Job continually. Now in verse 6 it says, now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. So here, the phrase sons of God in the Hebrew is Bain Ha Elohim. And this is the same Hebrew phrase used in Genesis chapter 6 to talk about the sons of God. And it's the same phrase used in Job chapter 2 verse 1, where the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord another time. And it says again they did that. So then there's Job 38:7 that talks about sons of God. It lacks the definite article ha, and it's just Bain Elohim, not Bain Ha Elohim. And so that verse actually is the only verse that I think has the phrase sons of God that seems to be implying angels. And it's never referring to those angels that have fallen or fallen angels. It's always referring to angels, good angels, before they've fallen. And I think that's really important because in Genesis 6, if all of a sudden sons of God, it can imply fallen angels, it can imply mankind, and it can imply good angels, it gets all confusing, and it doesn't seem to line up with the entirety of Scripture. So if we just recognize that the sons of God is referring to man's, because the word bane is referring to actual offspring, sons of man, and not offspring of angels and man and all that we've already gone to in Genesis chapter 6. And so many have used the understanding that they've received from Job 1:6 and Job 2:1 that the sons of God in these passages are referring to angels. But in this video, I'd like to show how sons of God here are most likely referring to godly men, as I read in that summary of George Rapkin's writing on it. I thought that was a very good example of what this passage is actually referring to. And so not all commentators agree that this is referring to angels when it talks about the sons of God. There's many that now that see that it's referring to godly men who presented themselves before the Lord for counsel, for worship, and how Satan, he's the one who as the accuser of the brethren, he interjects himself among the godly and accuses Job and his sons before God. So that's like the context of what's going on here. And so I think that when we understand that the sons of the east are being differentiated from the sons of God that came to present themselves before the Lord, those are the godly men, and Job was one of those sons of God. He was one of those godly men. We can then see how presenting yourself before the Lord is used with regards to man, because a lot of people think that in order to present yourself to the Lord, you have to be in heaven. But what we're going to find is that phrase is used with regards to man on the earth. In 1 Samuel chapter 10 and verse 19, it says, "And you have this day rejected your God, who himself saved you out of all your adversities and your tribulations, and you have said unto him, Nay, but set a king over us. Now therefore present yourselves before the Lord by your tribes and by your thousands." So there's a perfect example of men presenting themselves before the Lord after they had done wrong. And then in Joshua 24 verse 1, it reads, "And Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem and called for the elders of Israel and for their heads and for their judges and for their officers, and they presented themselves before God." So this links how the idea that presenting ourselves before God doesn't mean that we need to actually be in heaven to make that happen. What we learn in 1 Kings 22:19 is that the angels of God are already beside his throne. 1 Kings 22:19. "And he said, Hear thou therefore the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, and all the host of heaven standing by him on his right hand and on his left." So they're already beside God's throne. They're already there. So the idea of presenting ourselves before the Lord has to do with not being there to present yourself. So you have to make that happen in a particular way. And when men do that, it has to do with presenting yourself before the Lord in worship to receive counsel from him. And then when we also understand that Satan, in Job 2:1, it says, "Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord." Satan was presenting himself to the Lord in a different way. He was the accuser of the brethren. And we read about how he accused the saints day and night. We turn to Revelation chapter 12 in verse 10. Now, this is talking about when Satan was cast down from his place of power. He was the prince and the power of the air before Jesus went to the cross and resurrected from the dead. And he was the accuser of the brethren back in Job's day. But Revelation 12 is talking about how he was defeated through the cross, and he no longer has the power of death. That was the power that he held. And Jesus defeated him and stripped him of that power by through death and by resurrecting from the dead. So Revelation 12:10 says, "And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, Now is come salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God, and the power of his Christ, for the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony." So the blood of Jesus defeated the devil in all his accusations that he was able to make throughout time up to that point. And so this goes right along with that understanding that Satan was the accuser of the brethren, and he interjects himself among the godly, the sons of God, and accuses Job and his sons before God. And as in Job 1:10, or Job 1:9 into verse 10, "Then Satan answered the Lord and said, Doth Job fear God for naught? Hast not thou made an hedge about him and about his house and about all that he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. But put forth thine hand now and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face." So he's making all these accusations against Job, saying the only reason Job is serving you is because you've blessed him with all these things. So I think this all works together to show that the context is referring to godly men that present themselves before the Lord, and Satan, as accuser of the brethren, presents himself and accuses Job, and then the rest of the story unfolds from there. So the differentiation between the sons of the East, or the men of the East, and the sons of God is very similar to what was being referred to in Genesis chapter 6, with the sons of God taking wives from the daughters of men, those outside that godly lineage, those that weren't godly. So I hope this opened your eyes to these passages, to see that sons of God's referring to godly men, and that only one passage, Job 38:7, in the whole Old Testament, seems to be applying the phrase sons of God to actual angels, but never fallen angels. So let's not use that one example as a norm for what sons of God is referring to throughout the Old Testament, especially Genesis chapter 6, because when we look at the context, we allow context to bring about the understanding that it's not referring to fallen angels cohabitating with women and producing half angel, half human offspring, known as the Nephilim. So I'll link that video, Genesis 6, to the end of this video, and I'll link this video to the end of Genesis 6, because they both kind of go hand in hand, because many people use Job 1:6 and Job 2:1 to teach that means that Genesis 6 is referring to angels or fallen angels when talking about the sons of God. So anyway, I'll end this here and keep a lookout for more upcoming videos. All right, God bless.